on HCAM TV.
Hello, Hopkinton. Welcome to the Hopkinton Hangout Hour. I'm Mike Terosian, your host for tonight. Tonight, Wednesday, October 30th, last day of September 30th, last day of September. And tonight, I am lucky to have with me Carol Kavanaugh from the Hopkins School Department, and we have Sean McCullough from the Hopkinton Board of Health Department. And a lot of stuff going on this past week where the school started remotely, and all of a sudden, bam, they had to stop and shut down. So we had 2 new cases in town, and I want to start with Sean, who just came in, who is connecting with us now. Hopefully he can see me. How you doing, Sean?
Awesome.
Awesome. Are you kidding me? It looked like you just got done on your 50th hour.
I had to do a bottom inspection, I was doing sewer all morning,
Yep.
wells all afternoon. I had a conference call with Carol, 3 others, and then my last call, I had a police escort on. I've had a banner day.
Oh, hey. Well, listen, I'm going to make things nice and light and easy, and let's talk a little bit about COVID. So a lot of new things going in town other than restaurants being able to use their bar seating and so on and so forth and increasing their capacities. But let's talk about the 2 new cases in town, because that affected not only the town standing on the map, but it also affects the schools. So from the town point of view, let's start. What happened?
Oh, okay, we're ready to go now?
Town-wise. Yeah, we want to start town-wise. Let's talk COVID.
Okay, so first off, we've had 4 cases in the last week.
Yes.
3 of the cases are directly related to a set of significant clusters in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So to be clear, these 3 cases have nothing to do with anything that's going on within the community.
Okay.
They are directly related to the fact that people are involved in activities. People are involved in high-risk activities outside of the town, and that's the risk they're taking, and those risks inherently become our risks at some point, and that's
the high risk activities. Are they organized, or were they? And when I say organized, I'm not talking about a little party at somebody's house, but were they an organized event or a party or something like that?
They were an organized event that likely wasn't being. 2 of the cases are directly related to an organized event that wasn't being completed in accordance with the sector-specific guidelines, and that's my understanding.
Okay.
The other related case, it's related to that activity, and then there's some other stuff that I can't get into.
Correct.
But
I just want to remind people at home that we are lucky enough to get this kind of in-depth information from the Board of Health, but we also still have to respect people's privacy due to HIPAA and everything else. So that's why Sean is pausing to choose his words, because he doesn't want to violate the trust that he has.
And to be clear, actually, all 4 of the active cases that we have now are related to outside clusters. So, and this goes back to what we've been saying the whole time. If we continue to do what we're supposed to do by, reducing our exposure to high-risk activities, if we're wearing our face coverings, distancing, good hygienic practices, we're going to be okay as a community. And I'd like to say, given given all of this activity that we just had, and Casey and I are still, we're still in debate. Like, we have one case that we haven't settled with the state, if I own it or if another town owns it.
Sure.
And it might be that the fact that we consistently review our data to make sure that it's accurate, because its accuracy directly impacts our ability to operate certain functions in town. It has a direct impact on the school system. But I looked at the numbers tonight that were released, and we are still unshaded. We have a positivity rate, I think, of 0.34. So as a community, we are still doing well. And as we kind of roll with this speed bump, I believe we'll be back, where we were, a week, 2 weeks ago. But it'd be foolish for anybody to believe that we are going to be able to insulate ourselves from what's going on all around us. I mean, you look at Holliston. Holliston is a perfect example. They have a similar to Hopkinton, have a stellar history, and then they had a couple bad events, and they're what are they? They might be red, but they and that's all it takes.
And again, this information is so fresh and so ever changing that when we're done talking tonight, tomorrow is a different story, correct?
Right. I mean, I was at I had a conference call I was doing a flow test today, this simple 4-hour test.
Sure.
And, there were changes during the test that affected, some of the openings that I'm looking at. And this has been one of the challenges. And, Dr. Kavanaugh and I were discussing this morning, that, these regulations are continually being reviewed. I just asked for more review this evening at 5:30. So they are actively reviewing these regulations and in making these requests. And if we can justify why we believe that there should be a modification to these rules and regulations that exist, they will actually make them. But then that just adds another level of burden to us in the schools, or me in the library, or whatever group that we're helping, because now I've got to go back and, all right, there was just a change related to the way the senior center and I are going to interact. We have an event that it's directly impacting, and I'm like, I think we might have discussed this last week. Just because you can put 10 people at a bar or at a table, you might not want to put 10 people at a table. Exactly. You can put people at a bar. Maybe you don't want the people at the bar yet. So again, just to digest it all down, this is our challenge, is that we're in an ever-changing environment, and there are days that we're ahead, there are days that we're pivoting, and then there are days that we're kind of chasing.
Sure. So the school was asked to put plans together by a certain deadline. Now, Carol, I'm going to direct this one to you. You had a certain deadline to get your plan together. How many times have you modified this plan from that day to today?
So I'm assuming you're referring to the plan that we sent to the state.
Correct.
Some of the modifications to that plan are just teeny weeny little modifications. Some of them are a whole lot bigger. So, for example, when we were thinking about that, and this one is, I think, pretty timely, and I know a lot of parents are probably questioning this, but when we started to put together our plan, we thought, let's have 3 transition dates on which kids could go from hybrid to remote or remote to hybrid. Well, we asked parents on August 3rd to choose one of those plans, and then we began the scheduling process. You know, honestly, Mike, we probably finished that a week ago. So that's how long it took us to get to a place where we had all of our kids scheduled. So when we started to talk about having a transition date right now, you could sort of see all the people in the organization were just, short of breath, thinking that we would have to go through this whole scheduling thing one more time. So we're asking parents to make a choice again. The transition will happen on October 13th, but then we're going to hold off until the semester break in January. So that's a good example of one of the changes we've had to make. Some of them are a whole lot, smaller, just little tweaks here or there. One that Sean and I, in our meeting that he's referred to earlier today, we got to a place where people were wondering, why are we quarantining close contacts for 14 days? That's a change that not we didn't necessarily make, but came about as a result of Desi's interaction with the DPH. And I can even talk a little bit about that because I'm sure people are wondering. But when those changes keep happening, we struggle almost to keep pace with that. So when you were saying tomorrow could be an entirely different day for Hopkinton, it certainly can be for us too in the schools.
Right. So you could make, so you and Sean meet tonight, you make a decision that's going to affect, all right, here's the plan for 7 a.m. tomorrow. But all of a sudden you wake up at 7 a.m. tomorrow, you get an email. That's all going to change again because you just learned something new. It is changing that fast. And people need to realize that you are just like when kids move to town, you react to it. You try to plan, but you don't know how many kids are coming to town. So you don't know how many cases are going to come to town.
Yes.
You don't know how many parents are going to cause a closing. And that's the big question that everyone's asking today. And the main reason why I begged you to come on tonight and thank you for taking this time with us is why did we have to close for 2 days with 2 new cases? Can you just shed a little light? Let everyone know.
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'm sure that Sean will probably want to chime in and add in any missing pieces. So we did have 2 new cases, and I think that this conversation will illustrate for people just how different those cases can be. So in the first case, as I said in a letter that I had released to the community, that particular student had been in school on Monday only, and on Monday only for a half day. And so that was Monday, September 21st. So if we think about the half day, that would have limited that student's contacts. So we were able to kind of look at the classes that the student was in, identify close contacts, and ask those students to quarantine for 14 days from the last date of contact. So if we think about the fact that next Monday will be 2 weeks out, 14 days, those students will be back in Hopkinton High School, and there were very, very few of them. Now, on Monday evening of this week, so 2 days ago, Mr. Bishop and I both learned from Casey Morrow and Sean that there was a second case in the high school. But this particular student had been in school on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday and had attended all of that student's classes on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which means the student is in 7 classes and could potentially have 4 kids that might be considered close contacts in each one. So you get to 28. And then we were unsure, how many kids that student might have sat next to at lunch. So that would have upped the number. And then we were unsure of how many of those students would have had siblings in the Hopkinton public schools. So without the ability to do that contact tracing between, say, 5 o'clock at night and 9 o'clock at night, when people would be answering their telephones or looking for email, we really had to tap the brakes and say, this could, if we allow kids to come into our school when we're not sure of the enormity of the case, we could have spread COVID out anywhere in our schools. I mean, we got very lucky in the fact that the numbers were a lot smaller than we had anticipated. And, some of the PCR tests are coming back now and they're looking good. So I know Sean will probably want to add to that, but we feel very safe about opening the doors tomorrow, given where we are.
Before Sean adds to it, so basically, by tapping on the brakes, which is a great term, tapping on the brakes the way you did and closing for 2 days, if you decide to ease on the brakes a little and collect a little more data, kept things going, that could have put you in a worse situation.
Well, I mean, effectively, we kept a lot of students out who could have been close contacts. Let's imagine things were a lot worse than we anticipated. And let's say there were 40 close contacts. And let's imagine that half of them were positive. What if we brought those students in and say there were 20 of them and then they had another 25? We could have had an outbreak in Hopkinton High School that would have been enormous. That's not our case. I think we erred on the side of caution, and it was a really smart move for us, you know?
And I tend to agree. And Sean, how about you?
And so at the end of the day, we share a similar objective, like, and just like from my grocery days, when you send your child to school, the anticipation, or the expectation is that your child will come back the same way that you sent them to school at.
Sure.
We have the same expectation for the teachers, the staff, and all of the employees in the municipality. So like our goal first and foremost is to protect all of the employees and all of the students in the school system. So I get it. I've got children. Casey's got children. It's an inconvenience, but we're always going to err on the side of caution until we can rule people out. And there are going to be instances where, because of a possible interaction here or there, where the net we cast might be a little greater. But our expectation is that knowing what we know now and having better controls in place than we did back in February, March, April, we're going to be able to cast a more precise net, and then we need to tease through those to make sure that that the siblings are accounted for. A question came up this afternoon about a similar case where I knew that the parents had fantastic plans in place. And when I called yesterday, when I found out of a potential issue, they were like, no, we actually have a plan in place that we deployed just in case. And our two children have not seen each other. They are completely isolated away from each other, just because we thought that this could happen. And the younger child is been signed off on, but we had, I've had 3 conversations with that family. Casey's had 1, just to make sure that we're getting the same story. And that's one of the things that, I know I'll be discussing later on this week, is that, when we're making these contact calls, you're dealing with a parent who is now in distress. They've got a million questions in their head. They're trying to figure out how I'm going to possibly juggle childcare. I've got to notify my employer. I've got, I'm going to have to schedule appointments for my children to get seen. This isn't a, hey, I just want to let you know call. This is, bringing them down, walking them through things, and having, in most cases, it's a 10 to 20 minute conversation. And if you've got, you look back at March, we had people that possibly had 20, 30, 40 contacts. That could be a week's worth of work.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we want to stress is that, we're doing everything we can. And it takes Carol's team time to get us the information that we need, because not only are we doing all the contact tracing, but we've also got to do all the data upload to the state system. And in this case, we're not just loading it to the cases that these are tied to, but now I've got to tie everything into the mass cluster cases. So like it's an amazing amount of work. And then, I gotta
Well,
still got to try to do everything else we're doing.
right. Yeah. And you still have another town to run. I mean, you still have, you got to do deep polls. You still have to do Title V reviews. You got tons of stuff on your end that has nothing to do with COVID, but it's still business that still happens in town that still needs protection, that you need to do. But and you mentioned, and this is what I'm hoping people take home, is the amount of data that you got to go through. And like you say, it's a team effort, but your teams aren't that big. You don't have interns crunching the numbers for you, giving them to, yeah, look at that.
This is all on the school,
Yeah.
and half of this changed.
So, going through it and discussing your teams, you, Casey, do that, and Carol, you have your team. That's just a few people. And yet you still got regular school business that you're attending to.
Yes. I think, to kind of go back to, Sean's great big folders over there, if you think about student X who came to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday, now we're pulling seating charts, and granted, they're sitting in the same seats on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but we have to pull them for the math class, the English class, the science class, the social studies class, the art class, or whatever classes this particular student's enrolled in. And then those names and seating charts all go over to public health, and then they take a look and they determine who, according to those seating charts, would be close contacts. But then we also do it for lunch, and we also do it for school buses and those kinds of locations. So that's when they begin to, and it takes a very long time to take all of those names and addresses and dates of birth and all of that, and then push that information out and contact families. It's not easy when you've got a lot of people to kind of get in touch with, who all have, and rightfully so, a million questions.
Right.
Well, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, and then to further, just complicate the issue is, if you've got younger or older siblings, now we got to start looking at, what are we going to do? And then, the larger the family size, you're looking at, what are the extracurricular activities? Did older sibling take younger sibling to an event?
Sure.
And it just, you can see how this just, expands exponentially. And because within the cases that, within the known contacts that we're dealing with, that there's this potential for the numbers to be, it may only be, the 2 children had caused us to look at, I think between in school and out of school potential contacts, like 50, 60 people.
Right.
And so, when I started getting questions, so why did you have to close the games today? I'm like, well, the last thing I want is, the sibling of person, X playing soccer, and then to find out, tomorrow that they're positive. Now I've got to go reach into, another school. So again, we're doing everything we can to reduce our exposure and reduce our impact to the town.
Right.
And
We're getting questions and comments on Facebook and YouTube, and I'm going to start off with the best one. This is from Lexus. Great job this week. So happy we live in this town. So there's some good news that makes you feel good that your work is appreciated. But we'll go into some of the questions. Lee wants to know, how are you ruling people out, and what steps are taken, and what is the method to determine who is close contact? Can anyone expand on that?
I can, this is one of those things that's even changing. It's changed this week. So by definition,
Yep.
It's 6 feet away for 15 minutes or more.
Okay.
Then, if you're 6 feet and 6 inches for a full class session, the recommendation is that you capture those, even though, they're masked, even though, so the distance in the masking for the case contact, it can go just beyond. If we're talking someone who's diagonally 10 feet away, they're going to be a second tier consideration. We're going to focus on what the regulation requires us to look at. So it's always going to be 6 feet, 15 minutes or more. And then again, there's another nuance. If the case meets up with a friend for 5 minutes and they wrestle, punch each other, kick their books out from their, whatever they do. They walk together at a store and then walk their way back to their parents' house. So maybe they had 2 minutes of time at the school, but 20 minutes of mixed time outside. The advice now is that we consider all of that combined contact as a contact. So this is the granular stuff that, once we get the data from, Carol's team, we have to start teasing this out. And, there were a couple people that, by definition, probably shouldn't be in and shouldn't have been included as a contact. But then as we started teasing it out, you're going, oh, wow, you had 8 minutes within like 3 feet. But so we pulled them in. And it's, again, it's always better to act
on the side of contact.
On the safe side.
Yes. All right. So here's my question to you, because you guys know that I am a photographer, and you know how many times I get you into come and pose for my picture. So would you say 6 feet for 50 minutes left? Am I doing harm by asking 8 people, hey, take off your mask and let's take a nice picture to remember something by for that 2 minutes that I get them up there posing? Is that a bad thing?
I wouldn't,
because people are asking me these questions.
Yeah, no. I mean, and so it may not be that you're creating a contact, but one of the greater issues is when they're taking their masks off, they're getting photographed. Is that the behavior that we want to model? And this gets back to this is why our expectation is that all of those above us that are making these decisions, they need to be modeling proper behavior and setting an example for everyone below. And that's, it's what I have to do every day with my children. It's,
exactly.
They walk up to me with the thermometer, they zap my head and remind me that, Daddy, you forgot to take my time. I'm like, no, I didn't.
Again, the reason I asked this question today, we had a lieutenant retire today after 32 years of service. And these guys, now, and this is what, common knowledge to you and I, that they screen each other every day. They work together all day. They screen when they leave. And so screening like that and their precautions they taking a picture like that's fine. But the perception that you give to the public is, oh, they're together with their mask off, and they don't understand what goes on. So these are the questions that I'm trying to get out there. Why we don't have people gather for group shots is because you don't want to show that. But to take a picture with everyone with the mask on, it's like you look at the picture 20 years later. Hey, who was that retired that day? So reason why that question was asked. And that leads me into, that follows into Carol's question here. It's so close contact means closer than 6 feet, 15 minutes. How is that happening for students during a typical day? That's what that Marissa would like to know.
Yeah, so when we, if people have looked at any of the sort of photos or those kinds of things that I share at school committee meetings, or if anyone's been in any of our public schools, what you can see is that the desks are actually arranged so that they are all 6 feet or more apart. If you are, in a high school classroom, then where you are, seated say in one of the more center seats, you've got somebody who is 6 feet in front of you, 6 feet behind you, 6 feet to your left, 6 feet to your right.
Right.
So if those students are staying in that location for 45 minutes, and I know this is really challenging for parents to think that they've sent their child to school perfectly healthy. They assume that everything would be right with the world while their kiddo's in school that day. But here I am, I'm sitting here and I'm COVID positive, and you've got people on all four sides of me. All four of those kids are going to go home and they're now going to become close contacts, right? Which results in a 14-day quarantine. Now, I think one thing that parents should think about when we talk about 14-day quarantine is it's 14 days from your last exposure. So if their kid sat next to me on a Wednesday and then I tested positive on Saturday, and then there was a call from Sean and Casey, on Sunday during the weekend, the 14-day quarantine doesn't start from that Sunday. It starts from the last time that the student was with me. So that would have been Wednesday. So,
Okay.
I mean, in theory now, there really is going to be a sort of 10 school days kind of in that 14-day, but we've already kind of eaten up 3 of those 10. So now we're down to 7 school days. Half of those would be in school, half of those would be out of school before the student is allowed to return. But that would be true in any one of our buildings, that you're going to have a person very likely who is in front of you, behind you, to your left and to your right. Unless you have a seat that's at the very back of the room, unless you have a seat that's up against a wall, and that would reduce the number of close contacts for that student who is COVID positive.
Gotcha. So now Lee has asked, how many students are quarantined for 2 weeks from 2 students? Just a quick number. Well, I mean, how many would have to quarantine based on 2 students?
I don't know if we can.
Something makes me think, Sean, that we are not allowed to
I
answer
don't believe
that
we can.
question. I
Okay.
believe that it's true that we're not allowed to.
There you
But
go.
I mean, what we can say is it came out a whole lot better than we hoped, or than we thought. Do you know what I mean? At first we thought this could be very dismal, and it wasn't.
All right. Marissa wants to know, can we read the regulations? Are they available anywhere? So, Miss Transparency, can you tell us where we can find this information out?
I can have all of the regulations that I have access to sent to Josh, and then I can send them to Carol, and we can have those posted on the town's website, and then they could either as you feel best to distribute. And then this kind of gets back to, like, even when we reported like when we went through the process on Friday, like the conversation that I'm having at 5:15 with Desi, they're like, oh, and then within this folder, I'm like, you can't do this. Like this document that I'm seeing, I should have been emailed it so I could review it and see if there are any other nuances that affect, the way that we're going to make decisions. And you're just like, like Casey's like, thank God you don't carry anything heavy in your like the fire department would be torn apart right now because
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes. Another thing I think is, even if Sean shares all of those regulations with the community, and they go up on some website tomorrow, I can almost guarantee that, before the end of next week, he'll be taking them down and
Right.
altering them in some way.
Right.
I think one of the things that has surprised parents, especially through this process, is that it used to be that if you were a close contact and you went out and you got a PCR test, right? And you were symptom free then for 24 hours, we would allow you to come back into the schools. That has changed. So
Right.
even if a close contact now went out today and got tested and his PCR test or her PCR test came back negative, in the olden days, we would have said, olden days since March.
Oh,
It feels like olden days.
that's because we're living this 24/7. That's why it's old.
Yes. Uh-huh. But,
But-
in previous times, we would have let you back in after 24 hours, but now because of incubation period, new information about incubation periods, it's the whole 14 days.
So and that's answers Amy's question, which I was just about to ask you, why can't contacts return to school after they get a negative test? Thank you for clearing that up for Amy.
It's, and, and again, like I posed these specific questions at roughly 5:15, 5:30 to the DPH, DESE, the Department of Labor and Standards, and the governor's team, just because what we're trying to do is, so we have the regulation in hand. They've been discussing nuances. I have calls with this larger group 2 times a week, and I want to know what their thought process is, so that Carol and I can start planning. And actually, we're gonna start bringing in representatives from the school, and so that they can participate and and just be and be part of this, because it's an interesting process. And then everybody has to realize that this is all new to the whole group of us.
Oh yeah, well, you haven't been through a pandemic before? How old are you? I mean,
I studied off of a 1953 sanitarian book.
I was gonna say you studied this stuff, and the materials you must have had to be from the 50s or the 60s, and you talked about it. You planned a little bit when we had, the SARS, and we had all these other things going on. You planned and planned, but man, this thing just hit us. And now you got to take all that information, then you find out. I'm sorry, I'm like my little health sidekick out, but here's all this information that you planned on over these years, and you realize, well, that don't apply to this.
Right.
And now what do? You're starting fresh. You are our innovators, our leaders, and we appreciate how much effort and time you put into this, because you have to. This is what you're breathing now. I'm afraid to call your office. I had a Title V question on a well, and I says, I'm not going to bother you. You got so much else going on that I'm going to find out on my own somewhere else. And it's like, you guys are just eating this every single day, living and sleeping.
Like Casey was editing a document at 3:15 this morning, and I said, "What are you doing editing a document at 3:15 in the morning?" She's like, "Why are you reviewing it at like 5:45?" And I'm like, "Touche." I mean, but that's there was a time when Dr. Kavanaugh and I we would have our communication between like 9 and 10, because it was the only free time that we had when like we were alone, clear in thought, and we could just catch up, because it is it's a huge moving target. And
All right, Dr. Kavanaugh, Chris wants to know, is there any reason the green-orange cohorts can't join synchronous learning while at home?
So we actually talked about that. That's a great question. When we were having a dialogue on Monday night about what we were going to do for Tuesday and Wednesday, obviously, I've said we didn't know really the magnitude. So what happened was we had 5 building principals, the assistant superintendent, and I in a room, and we had that conversation about, okay, so if we're going to keep a group out of school on that day, but there is at-home learning for the orange cohort, say, for example, but there would have been green kids in school. And I'm not sure if I have it exactly right, if it was a green or orange day that day. But then we said, okay, so if we put them all together and we try to marry them this way, they are kind of almost a day off from each other, because you know what I'm saying? Like, we kind of keep moving them along in pace. So we thought, all right, that's going to mix everything up when it gets to be Thursday and we're all going back to school. So because this was a 2-day closure, we decided we would just keep everybody on that same kind of pacing where we were kind of leaving off. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? So
Yeah.
when we came back in on Thursday, you'd have an at-home day, you'd have an in-person day, and the learning would just keep marching on with the same kind of pace and scope of curriculum. If we ever, and oh, I knock on wood saying it, if we ever had to go fully remote, that would be the goal, is to take the green cohort and the orange cohort, combine them and make them and return them to sort of the one class they would have been if we had room in our schools to. I mean, the only reason we have an orange cohort and a green cohort is that I can't put 20 kids in a classroom and have 6 feet of social distancing, but I can put 10 and 10 and have 6 feet of social distancing. If you had to go fully remote and you didn't worry about getting back on that same sort of pattern of
Sure,
learning,
sure.
you'd absolutely marry them and they would become one happy classroom of 20 children.
Absolutely, which is great, but
Yes.
you know, you miss. I mean, I tell you, I wasn't the best student, but man, I loved my teachers. I
Yeah.
couldn't imagine not doing what these kids are doing today. So
No.
that goes. You lead to Don's question here. It says, can we move the desks further apart to change the close contact with math students?
Um, it all depends on which classroom
Can
would
we
be the
push
right
some
age.
walls out? Can we?
You know, there are some classrooms, honestly, there are some classrooms where just because of the way scheduling works, there might only be 7 kids. And certainly, you know, you could have greater than 6 feet of social distancing in that classroom. But, you know, there are some where we've got 12 or 14 kids in there and the social distancing of 6 feet is 6 feet. You know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, being able to be inside the schools and you see the work that you've done and see, I pity the poor guys that has to clean the carpet this summer with all the tape and everything on the floors and those carpets. It's going to be something. But
Yeah.
I seen every effort made. I never seen so many hand sanitizer stations. Um, you know, I think, you know, I'd love if I had younger children, I would feel good about being there. And that's because I am fortunate enough to be able to be inside the schools because of the work that I do.
Yes. And
So,
if I can just kind of jump in there. So
sure.
our custodial staff and maintenance staff did an amazing job all summer. But you know what? Right now, I'd like to just take a minute and thank the teachers, because if you think about this, on Monday night, somewhere between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m., all the teachers, so somewhere around 350 of them, learned that they weren't going to have kids in school the next day, that whatever it was they intended to teach had to be transformed into its remote format and pushed out to kids, you know, obviously in a Zoom session, but there would have been, you know, work and papers and things like that, reading, math, and they managed to do it in under 24 hours. You know, it was really a 12-hour turnaround time.
Right.
I
So,
am so amazed what they were able to do.
so that, and you do have teachers teaching in school remotely as
Yeah.
well. So they had to change their plans to get their stuff from, oh, here's my lesson I'm going to be teaching tomorrow at the school. All my stuff is here. Now I have to teach it from home. They had to make all that change as well.
Yes, well, teachers were able to come in if they wanted to. But if I thought I was going to see you in person, Mike, and I was going to be able to deliver a lesson, hand you a worksheet in
Yep.
person, I had to now set up Zoom links, make that worksheet electronic, upload it to someplace. And I had to do that across multiple subject areas if I'm an elementary teacher, or I
Yep.
had to do that across multiple prep periods or different classes at the high school level.
Wow.
So it was a lot of work, and
Yeah,
I'm
a lot of work.
grateful. Yep.
Yeah, you know how much I adore the teaching staff there. I think that's wonderful. You know, you guys are doing a great job. Sean, so the big question is now is the information that you're gathering and you're collecting here. Um, what if that was to bump up one more person? What happens to the town then? So what thinking, are we then shaded? Is it 3 people? We get shaded to gray?
We, if we get, you know, 1 or 2 more in the next week, you know, we'll probably bounce to green. But again, you know, it's this, we've done a good job. You know, we've, so, you know, if everybody, as I said, they just ride this bump out, we get back, and then, you know, if you know, this you know, it caused, you know, the school department and the health department to look and identify some issues. It caused us as a health department to look at other issues. I mean, Hopkinton, Norman warned me when I came here that um, the parents in Hopkinton are very engaged, and I must have received 20 or 30 emails, and I took them all and I looked at it, and one of the things that I took away from a bunch of those is that that we need again to take a deep breath as a town, and we have what 4,500 kids and 500 staff in the school. So we have a huge concentration that's going in and out of buildings. They're commuting from home. They're having interactions. Things are going to happen, and we need to just be ready for these. But it doesn't mean we need to, what I don't want to happen from this is for parents to start calling out, I don't want any vigilantism because the track team or someone is running down the Hayden Row. I don't want people to start like really just picking on the youth. It's our job to set the example, to model the right behavior, and we have to understand that on any given day, any one of us could run into an issue. So, this is a time to reflect on all of the positive things that we've done, to really reflect on the fact that, like, we're committed to work together to make this better. And each time, heaven forbid, we don't I don't want any more times. And if we continue to do the right things, we might not have any times, but we need to be ready and just and roll with it. And again, just to be a little more civil on social media, and just
Well,
again,
that's easier said than done, I'm sure. I agree
I
with
know. I mean,
life is
trust
too
me,
short to be mean and nasty all the time. We get that. But Dr. Kavanaugh, a question in from Andrea. If a child in elementary school hybrid class gets COVID, will the whole class be quarantined? How will the class be taught?
So I would say that that is probably a better answer for Sean, but the conversations that we have had pretty much indicate that it would be very difficult, I think, in an elementary school classroom where you've got 9 or 10 kids to try to make that determination of, with whom did those kids interact for greater than 15 minutes, 6 feet or closer to one another throughout a 6.5 hour school day. So the likelihood of taking a look at that class and isolating close contacts, we would probably make the entire class close contacts.
Right. And that is one of the issues I know that's being discussed. And would they consider allowing us to go and really do what we've applied at the high school setting? But and this is just, again, it's being discussed. Whether or not anything comes from this, I'm not exactly sure, because I honestly thought I was convinced that the source of some issues were going to be addressed on Tuesday, and
Yeah.
and I just don't know anymore.
So with the fact I gotta, as time is closing up, we got about 10 minutes left. I do want to get out the accolades because, believe it or not, Sean, there are nice people on social media, because Marissa says, thank you, Sean, for talking about social media and being so polite. And to Dr. Kavanaugh, teachers, staff, and principals are outstanding. That comes from Lee. And, I couldn't agree more. I think if I was a child in this school system now, I think I would have been a much better student than I was back in Malden during the 70s and 80s. So, different times, different methods. and so forth. And for you taking the time with us today and often, it just seems like, and I know it's like you guys saying, oh, you guys must be sick of hearing from us. No, we need this because the information that is going out to the public is skewed mostly based on emotion and misinformation. And where do you get your news from? Who tells you to think like this? Who, you know it's hard. Like me, I was always told when I was growing up, we had two news sources. We had the Herald and the Globe. Okay. And then I invited Chet and Natalie into my living room at 6 p.m. And that was our news. And that's how we got it. And we decided for ourselves. Now there's so many methods that because, oh, look at this, I got a phone. I'm a news reporter and I can put out news and just say something and people will take that and go with it. You just have to go to the trusted sources. And if you're not sure what you are digesting from those sources, ask an official. Don't ask a Facebook group.
And
Help me with that.
this just quickly, this gets to this other issue with because, you know, because people are able to communicate and check and investigate, it doesn't mean that that's really the best thing to do every day, and especially in these two instances, because our job is to investigate the issue and mitigate the risk, and then help care and oversee those that are sick. The three children that are part of these clusters, again, it was nothing that they did. So, for people to go out and start, identifying them because they figured out how they could identify them, that doesn't do anybody any good. And I like it, the families and the children are dealing with enough trauma. They don't need this on
Yeah.
top of that.
Yeah.
And remember, like, if this happens to you, I joke, someone's like, well, I want to know. And I'm like, well, if you had syphilis, do you want me to tell you that, tell everybody that you had syphilis? No. So for the love of God, you've got to respect everybody's privacy, and that on any given day, you could be put in the same situation. And
You're absolutely right.
that is the key takeaway from this.
Yeah,
is that-
Sean, I went to run an errand today and I learned the people's names. And it's like, I don't want to know this. I don't need to know this.
Right.
It's like, why do you feel the need to do this to people? And that's why we have you out here to tell us. We trust you. You are our town officials, and that's what we're looking for. We're looking for the answers. We're getting this information out here, and we need you to set the record straight. That's why, and I talked to Dr. Kavanaugh at the beginning of this meeting before we started. I says, hey, I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you these questions I'm hearing on Facebook, and I'm sorry if you're sick of hearing them, but, let's clear the air because nobody is.
Yeah. I mean, like we have both adults and children that are crying. I don't need anybody else. Like, I don't need to bring any more and inflict any more on, again, people. And that's probably the most challenging thing throughout this whole 6 to 8 months is, just people forget that, they're your friends and neighbors.
That's right. Just like town meeting, we don't all agree, but the friends and neighbors when we're done. And so I have one more follow-up question from Andrea, who wants to know that if the class is quarantined, will the class be taught via Zoom while quarantining at home on their in-school day?
So that's an interesting question.
I'm glad Andrea brought it up. Thank you, Andrea.
So I think that the answer to that question will vary. So I think if I were a second grade teacher and I was in that classroom all day, and so now I am also quarantined, right? So it might be possible for me to be Zooming at home with all of my in-person kids, just like they would have done over the last couple of days, while my at-home kids were working on the at-home work. And then, of course, it would flip-flop, and the next day I would be Zooming with my potential in-class kids while my at-home kids were doing the at-home work. But it gets a lot trickier when you get to the high school level, because if I'm a high school math teacher, for example, and I have one classroom where I'm missing 4 students, say,
Yep.
but all of the rest of my kids are either A, in class with me during that period, or B, in class with me during all the other periods, I still have a full teaching load at the high school that goes on all day.
Sure.
So what we've been doing is sort of treating this as what would it look like if you were out sick? Now, I know the problem here is that I'm missing my in-person instruction, and what I'm getting from my teacher is sort of work to do. And it doesn't mean that it wouldn't be instructional, right? I mean, I could conceivably get something to read with an assignment that gets feedback, just like all the other kids. I upload it to Schoology, it comes back to me. I do, 15 math problems. I have to watch a Khan Academy video. But it is true that for a period of time, those close contacts at this point in time are pretty much learning remotely, almost exclusively. So if we go back to that 14-day scenario I had described, and I said, all right, what my last contact with the COVID positive person was on Monday, I learned about it on Friday. I've already used up 4 of my in-school quarantine days. So my real loss, I think, in the way of in-person time would be either 2 or 3 days, which feels pretty terrible, I think, to kids like that, But if it happened that my last contact was on a Wednesday and I learned about it on Friday, now I'm probably got a 7-day span. So now the time that I would have been in person, I'm out 3 days or 4 days away from my teacher. So a lot of this has to do with timing. I don't think we would ever have a time when kids would be doing that remote instruction on their in-person day more than 3 or 4 times, but it certainly could conceivably happen. I mean, I think the 3 or 4 is probably the max, but still that's unfortunate. You know what I mean? So we are thinking hard about what will we do for the high school aged kids if only a certain group of them are considered close contacts and they have to be quarantined for 14 days under the new guidance.
And just to add like another, like maybe a more positive modification that might be coming is they are looking at the federal government and the state government will likely be pushing out a rapid testing system to all the school districts.
Yep.
And if this works, it's likely to change the way that we handle contacts, quarantine, isolation time. All of that again could change, and that's coming. I anticipate that those modifications will be made before the new year.
Okay, so real quick, because we only have a minute left. Real short answer, and I will accept from each of you a yes, no, or maybe. Marissa wants to know, are we anticipating 2 days out of school every time we need to contact trace?
No.
No,
No. It's
I'm adding resources, and that should help.
Okay, great. Sean, real quick. I'm getting bombarded by my CVS ads, and I'm looking at all this candy I'm down to buy. Do I have to buy this candy yet? Can I give candy out for Halloween? Tell me.
It's looking good.
All right. That's what I need to
It's
know.
looking very good. A
Good.
traditional Halloween.
Traditional Halloween. Forget about the snowstorms that we could get before it and all that good stuff. But we have to close. Dr. Kavanaugh, Sean McCall, thank you so much. This has been intriguing, and I'm pretty sure we'll probably have you back again.
Yeah.
Sometime soon.
My pleasure. Thank you. And
Thanks,
Sean,
guys.
thank you for everything.
And everybody, thank you again for watching the Hopkinton Hangout Hour. We will see you on Monday next week. And I forget what's on, but I need to go because Bob is waving his finger at me to wrap up. So everyone, I wish you good night. Thanks, guys. Thanks again.
Thank you. Good night, Darren.
Good night.